London has always shone as a showcase for pop culture. Big Ben marking the hours of the Empire, red buses cutting through the fog, packed theaters in the West End, and an accent that the whole world recognizes at first hearing. But what if this sophisticated postcard is starting to fade? This video is part of our series, What's Happening?, where we dive into the current realities of places that everyone thinks they know, but almost no one sees from the inside. Now it's time to take a look at one of the most famous capitals on the planet and discover that behind the Victorian elegance and glass skyscrapers, there are noisy dilemmas that can no longer be swept under the rug. Behind the scenes of afternoon tea, the city faces housing crises, rising youth violence, an exhausted healthcare system, and economic scars from Brexit that still hurt workers' pockets. Today on Bello Mundo, we go beyond Buckingham Palace to show you what's happening in London. Number 1. Understanding London in the United Kingdom. Before diving into the real problems of the city, it's worth taking a break to clear up some confusion that many people still have. London, England, United Kingdom. What's the difference anyway? To begin with, the United Kingdom has a full name that already gives us a clue: United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And contrary to what many people think, it is not a single country, but rather a union of 4 distinct countries: England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Each has its own culture, traditions, and even its own parliament. But when it comes to foreign policy, defense, or immigration, the central government in England is in charge. England is the largest of the 4 countries, both in terms of population and territory. It is home to London, a megacity with almost 9 million inhabitants spread over more than 580 square miles. In other words, London is the capital of England, and also the capital of the entire United Kingdom. This is where the largest financial centers, government headquarters, and decisions that impact the entire country are located. But at the same time, it is also here that inequalities take shape and show that Europe's most famous capital is far from perfect. Number 2. The price of the London dream. If London is the nerve center of the United Kingdom, it has also become a testing ground for patience and for the pockets of those who live there. British inflation is around 4% per year, according to the BBC, but in the capital, the situation is much tighter. By October 2024, the average rent had risen by more than 10% in 12 months, reaching around £2,200 per month, according to The Guardian. And that's just the beginning. To compare, living in London today costs about 30% more than living in Paris. And real estate there is up to 70% more expensive than in the French capital, according to the website Numbeo. In other words, those who arrive in the city with dreams of conquering the world often end up facing a much less glamorous reality and a pile of bills to pay. Even the basics have become expensive: groceries, transportation, utilities, rent. A single person needs at least £1,000 a month just to cover essential expenses, and that doesn't include housing. Now, if you add rent, the total easily goes from £3,000 to almost £5,000 a month. When you do the math for the year, the cost of living can exceed £50,000. This is well above the minimum wage and even the average income for many professions. The result? Many people simply can no longer afford to live in the city. Entire families are living in single rooms. Young people continue to live with their parents until they are over 30. And what is even more frightening, essential workers, such as teachers, nurses, and police officers, are being forced out of the city where they work because they simply cannot afford to live there. London has become a city that seems to be made only for those who are already rich, and those who don't fit in have to leave or end up on the streets. Number 3. Homeless people. In early January 2025, more than 1,200 people were sleeping on the streets of the British capital, even with temperatures below freezing. The cold was so severe that the city council had to activate emergency plans. But the number is just the tip of the iceberg. Behind these statistics are real people. People who had homes, jobs, routines. People who, due to unemployment, illness, or separation, simply fell and had no way to get back up. And the system doesn't hold anyone back. Cuts to social services, lack of affordable housing, mental health issues without adequate care. All of this pushes the most vulnerable onto the sidewalk. And many of them are not drug addicts or chronically homeless. They are ordinary workers who couldn't make ends meet. The mayor of London has even accused the central government of indifference. And honestly, it's hard to disagree when you see entire families sleeping in makeshift shelters, in cars, or occupying public hotels with no end in sight. Some children don't have a fixed address to give at school. They do their homework in public libraries because they don't have a desk, or peace and quiet, or light where they live. And speaking of children, they are the ones who suffer most when everything collapses. Number 4. Child poverty. When crisis hits, the first signs appear among the youngest, and in London, the data is stark. In the 2024 school year, the City Council allocated £150 million to ensure free meals for more than 270,000 children in primary schools. It seems like a commendable initiative, and it is, but it also reveals a gap that continues to grow. Hundreds of thousands of families simply cannot afford a meal for their own children. And we're not talking about luxury. This is real hunger. Children who wake up without breakfast, who spend the morning distracted in class because their stomachs are empty, who only eat something decent when the school serves lunch. And when the weekend or holidays arrive, their only option is to seek help from shelters or charities. In April 2024, the United Kingdom reached its highest child poverty rate since comparative records began in 2002. According to the government itself, around 4,450,000 children currently live in low-income families, representing 31% of the country's child population. And the forecast is even bleaker. Organizations such as CPAG, which work directly with this population, warn that if nothing changes, this number could exceed 4.8 million children living in poverty by 2029. But obviously, these problems are not the only ones. Number 5. The collapse of public services. If living in London is already a strain on the pocketbook, imagine when the problem is getting sick, catching a bus, or putting your children in school. The NHS, the British public health system, once a symbol of national pride, has now become synonymous with waiting, frustration, and collapse. Just to give you an idea, in March 2025, the waiting list for hospital appointments reached more than 7,400,000 people, and less than 60% of patients received treatment within the legal deadline of 18 weeks, a figure well below the target of more than 90%. In emergencies, the situation is even worse. 1 in 4 patients waited more than 4 hours for treatment, and almost 45,000 spent more than 12 hours waiting for a bed. 12 hours on stretchers in corridors with no privacy and no prospect of relief. And if it's not healthcare, it's transportation. subway, and train fares in London rose in March 2025. A daily pass to travel through the central zones now costs almost £9, and a monthly pass for those who live further away has exceeded £300, the highest price ever recorded. For those earning minimum wage, this cost weighs much more than it seems. Education is also in crisis. Estimates suggest that in the next school year, school spending will grow faster than the money they will receive. In practice, this means that around 80% of primary schools and over 90% of secondary schools will not have enough budget to function. The result? Cuts in materials, fewer teachers, and more crowded classrooms. And social services have practically disappeared from many neighborhoods. Community centers are closing, libraries are disappearing, youth support programs have been cut. In many parts of London, it's as if the state has simply gone away. Number 6. Urban violence and insecurity. Obviously, with so much going downhill, security wasn't going to be left out, right? London may not have the alarming rates of violence seen in some Latin American cities, but within the European context, the warning signs have been flashing for a long time. In 2024, the Metropolitan Police recorded more than 16,500 crimes involving knives. That's roughly 46 incidents per day. London alone accounted for almost a third of all cases recorded in England and Wales. But these cold numbers alone do not tell the whole story. Behind each attack, there is a much deeper and more worrying scenario. Many of these crimes originate in neighborhoods where the government has no presence, but where gangs have already staked their territory. Entire regions, especially housing projects on the outskirts, have become silent battlegrounds. Drug trafficking, although less overt than in other places, moves millions and fuels a cycle of violence that seems to have no end. Worse still, many young people are recruited while still in their teens. This is the so-called knife route, where teenagers, usually black or immigrants, are used as human couriers between cities. For many people who have grown up on the margins of society, with poor schools, racism, and a lack of opportunities, entering this world is almost inevitable. It is a choice made out of a lack of choice. The Metropolitan Police, once a model force, now faces its own image crisis. Cases of corruption, allegations of structural racism, abuse of authority. All of this has eroded public trust. In many neighborhoods, especially among ethnic minorities, the police are seen more as a threat than as protection. And when trust disappears, fear grows, and crime gets stronger. And as if that weren't enough, the weather has also decided to weigh in. Number 7. Climate crisis and public health. London is not immune to the effects of climate change. Extreme heat waves, unthinkable just a few decades ago, are now part of the routine in English summers. The problem is that the city was not built to cope with this new scenario. Most London homes are old, with no air conditioning or efficient insulation. When temperatures rise above 30 degrees, these buildings become veritable ovens. And the public transportation system, which is already operating at capacity, suffers even more from the extreme heat. As always, it is the poorest who suffer the most. Residents of housing projects who cannot afford to adapt their homes face unbearable heat. Many of these buildings do not even have adequate ventilation. But the heat is only part of the problem. Air pollution in London remains one of the biggest public health challenges. According to the City Council, around 4,000 Londoners die every year from causes related to poor air quality. In areas close to major roads, the rate of childhood asthma is growing at an alarming rate. The very architecture of the city, with narrow streets and buildings close together, creates veritable pollution corridors. And then there are the invisible effects, the psychological ones. Living in a city where gray skies are more common than blue ones, where sunshine is a luxury and noise is constant, has a direct impact on the mental health of the population. London is among the European capitals with the highest rates of depression and anxiety, and part of this has to do with how the city deals with environmental stress. But if you think that's the end of the list, think again. There's more. Number 8. Immigration and social tensions. London has always been synonymous with diversity. Immigrants from Asia, Africa, the Caribbean, Europe, all have helped shape the city as it is today. Vibrant, multicultural, and full of contrasts. But lately, this mix has brought a challenge that no one can ignore anymore. The problem is not with the people who arrive, but with the lack of infrastructure to receive them. After Brexit, the United Kingdom created stricter rules for foreigners entering the country. The number of new immigrants with visas has fallen sharply, but illegal crossings of the English Channel continue to grow. In April 2025, more than 1,100 people arrived at once, the highest number so far this year. Meanwhile, neighborhoods such as Tower Hamlets and Newham, which already have large immigrant communities, are at breaking point. Tower Hamlets, for example, is the most densely populated district in England, with more than 16,000 people per square kilometer. Almost 40% of residents identify as Muslim, forming a strong community that faces integration challenges. Schools are overcrowded. The healthcare system is overwhelmed. There are not enough jobs. And that is where tensions arise. Because when basic needs are not met, people look for someone to blame. There is another sad side to this story. Many immigrants arrive with degrees, experience, and professions. They are doctors, teachers, engineers, but they cannot work in their fields because the United Kingdom does not recognize their qualifications. The result? They become delivery drivers, cleaners, waiters, and the country, which already suffers from a shortage of skilled workers, simply wastes people who are ready to contribute. Number 9. Brexit. Shooting ourselves in the foot. After everything we've seen, the housing crisis, insecurity, the collapse of public services, growing poverty among children and working families, it's hard not to point to a bigger culprit. And it has a name: Brexit. When the UK decided to leave the European Union in 2016, the rhetoric was beautiful. Regaining control, protecting British jobs, saving money on Brussels bureaucracy. But what happened in practice was a domino effect that completely destabilized London. It started with the labor market. From 2016 to 2023, the city lost almost 300,000 jobs that would have been created if the country had remained in the European bloc. London's gross domestic product fell by £30 billion. That's more than 200 billion rees evaporating from the city's accounts. And with less growth came austerity. Public services are languishing. Cuts have been made in education, health, and social assistance. The result is there for all to see. Overcrowded schools, hospitals without beds, shelters without space. The financial sector, which was the economic heart of the capital, bled dry. Dublin, Paris, Amsterdam, and other European capitals snapped up thousands of jobs that were previously in London. Dublin alone, for example, took more than 10,000 jobs in the banking sector. And with the end of free movement of people, the city also lost the skilled labor that came from Europe: nurses, teachers, engineers, professionals who made services work and who are sorely needed today. The housing crisis itself has also worsened. Investors have left the country. Public housing programs have stalled. The number of homeless people has skyrocketed, along with the number of families living in cramped rooms far from urban centers. Brexit was sold as redemption, but it ended up being the trigger for many of the dilemmas London faces today. And perhaps the cruelest part is this: those who believed most in the promise of a new England ended up being the ones most harmed by it. So what does the future hold for the British capital? The projections are not encouraging. If nothing changes, the British capital risks becoming a playground for the rich, while the rest of the population continues to be pushed out. So, did you know about everything that's happening in London? Which of these problems shocked you the most? If you liked it, leave a like, share it with those who still think that everything there is perfect, and subscribe to Bello Mundo to continue traveling with us through realities that almost no one shows. Thanks for joining us, and see you at the next stop.